I'm Mike Wildbacker, the director of the Schuylkill Center for Environmental Education. This is the third installment in a 6-part series, our spring semester, if you will, of Thursday Night Live. So this is our third Thursday at 7 o'clock. We got 3 more to go after this. So tonight, Snakes, Turtles, and Toads, Oh My, the Reptiles and Amphibians of Philadelphia. I'll introduce our speaker in just a moment. Some of you who signed on earlier may have seen this slide go by a couple of times. Just so we're all in the loop. We are recording the event. It will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, which actually is a great resource for all the Thursday Night Lives. So you can see other lectures that you might have missed, and you can go looking through the collection of lectures that you might have missed. So go check out our YouTube channel, and this will be uploaded in the next few days. So do keep your microphones on mute. Of course, we're all experts at this by now. Turn off your video if you don't want to be visible in the recording as well. And we are screen sharing, so use the side-by-side view so you can see the speaker and the slides. We're going to be asking Billy questions at the end when he's done, and I'm going to be moderating the questions via chat. But feel free to put your questions in at any point in the next 45 minutes. And when we get to the question part, I'll take them in order as they come. So add your questions anytime. So. I do want to do a shout out for next week. The next installment of Thursday Night Live features Sarah Dykman, the author of this book, Bicycling with Butterflies. This is an extraordinary story. She actually biked with 70 pounds of gear. She biked a 1989 refurbished bicycle only 5 years ago, 10,201 miles, starting with the monarchs in their sanctuary in Mexico, in the mountains, in the Oyamel forests, all the way up, and she followed them to Canada and back down again. So I'm halfway through the book. It's just a pleasurable read, and Sarah's going to be our guest next week. She'll be zooming in from Kansas City. So we do invite you to come back next week for a bicycling with butterflies, or she calls it butter biking. If you're new to the Schuylkill Center, and I hope some of you might be, we do have 4 miles of trails. We are free, so come for a walk anytime. Love to have you on our trails. We're located, easy to find us, just below Ridge Avenue in Upper Roxborough off of Hagees Mill Road. Of course, we'll have direct directions on our website, schuylkillcenter.org. We are an environmental education center that's been doing programming of all kinds for more than 50 years, including field trips for school students like this, summer camp, and so many more programs, like programs for adults like Thursday Night Live. We also opened the first nature-based preschool in the state of Pennsylvania. Now in its 9th year, we're very proud of the program. And we've had just a really moderate impact from COVID in the last 2 years because the kids have been outside even on cold February days. So the outdoors has been our secret weapon in the pandemic. It's been great for the kids. We are opening a new art exhibition. We have a really ambitious environmental art program, engaging artists who wrestle with environmental issues. Companions is the next show, and has both indoor and outdoor components. And if you hold up these filters to the outdoor murals, you've got some surprises in what you will see in the mural. So I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. There's also a foraging walk at the opening, so check that out on our website. We also, almost a year ago now, 11 months ago, began installing what's called a mudif. It's a guest house in the Iraqi culture, made from Phragmites reed grass. They've been doing it for 5,000 years, but amazingly enough, never built one outside of Iraq. So Roxborough was the first site outside of Iraq for a mudif. It's been winterized. Mudifs are made for arid climates. It didn't do well in our winter, even though it was winterized, we took the roof off. So we're gonna have a ceremonial de-installation of it on Memorial Day weekend, bring together veterans in the Iraqi war and Iraqi immigrants to the United States. So it's a sort of an extraordinary healing ceremony. They helped build it a year ago. Now they're gonna help de-install it. So check that out on our website as well. We operate the only wildlife clinic in the city, one of the few in the region, as I think many of you know. In the clinic, of course, it's baby squirrel season, and that's the photograph right there. So of the 2,000 plus patients at our wildlife clinic, a big chunk of them are baby squirrels, like this one being fed right here. We also have entered into a program with Bird Safe Philly, an organization that with volunteers who walk through Center City looking for birds who are stunned because they struck the glass in skyscrapers, and they bring to our clinic, like this evening grosbeak, to heal and be released. So actually, our clinic director, Chris Strubb, and Bird Safe Philly's founder, Lee Altadonna from Wyncote Audubon, will be with us on Earth Day in 2 weeks. So join us, among other special guests. So join us for Earth Day Live in 2 weeks. Many of you know our toad detour program. I'm sure Billy's going to talk about it in just a few minutes. I do want to do a shout out and thank you to the toad detour volunteers. 1,000 toads have crossed Port Royal Avenue and Eva Street to get into the reservoir already. The toads should be singing right now. And tonight should be a great toad night, I would think. It's wet and warm, so probably a good toad night. So do join us for that. We are a volunteer organization. You can volunteer on our website, like the fanatic did here in planting a tree with us a couple of birthdays ago. And we also are a member-based organization. Members receive discounts on programs and in our gift shop, which has the best bird seed in the region. Loyal followers of our bird seed, so you get a discount on our great bird seed, plus advance notice of exclusive programs. You can join online. If you are a member, thank you so much. We so appreciate it. Really appreciate your membership and your support. But tonight we're here to talk about snakes, turtles, and toads. Oh my, hope you don't mind the reference, of course. I'm going to stop sharing and introduce our speaker, Bernard Billy Brown. So Billy asked us not to panic, but snakes, salamanders, frogs, toads, turtles are all around us, even in Philly's most urbanized areas. So we're happy to welcome back Bernard Billy Brown, naturalist, writer, and herper. Billy writes the Urban Naturalist column for Grid, the region's sustainability magazine, as a necessary column for any Philadelphian interested in nature, frankly, and co-hosts the Urban Wildlife podcast with his good friend and ace birder, Tony Crosdale. Welcome, Billy.
Hey, everybody. Let me make sure I am audible, right?
We hear you perfectly, and we see your slides, so all is great. We're so glad you're back with us. Thank you, Billy.
Thank you for having me. I was listening to this lineup coming up of other speakers, and I feel very underwhelming by comparison, but I hope we have a good time. I am going to talk about, sort of run through, and try not to make it too much of a just like bombarding you with reptiles and amphibians, even though for me, that would be like the best night ever. I know that not everybody loves the things I love in the exact proportions to which I love them. And so I might mess a little bit with the format. I might throw some questions out to you guys and see what comes back in the chat, just to get some of, if we were in a room together, the way I prefer to do this kind of thing is yeah, have the slideshow, but try to get info from the people in the audience about what and where and what their experiences are with them. Not necessarily questions, we'll maybe save proper questions till the end, but it is, it's 7 o'clock. I don't know how, if you are in the mood to have just, pictures thrown at you, we can do that. But I like to be a little more interactive, and also I learn stuff. This is, my ulterior motive to all, on top of all the pure motives of sharing knowledge about the natural world in Philadelphia, is that I get to pick up tips and intel on where things are. So what I'm going to start with is, we refer to ourselves as herpers, and this is herping. You might notice that shares a similar sound with other words that sometimes make people giggle. I like to get the giggles out at the beginning of a presentation when I start talking about herping, to point out that both the root for the word for herpetology, which comes from a Greek word meaning to creep. So if you think of, I don't know how well we should reference Genesis in the Judeo-Christian Bible, but there's the line in there about the creation of the things that creep, and so that's the kind of thing we're thinking of when that name got applied to reptiles and amphibians, and when we're looking at the viruses that cause herpes infections, that family of viruses, they'll cause lesions that creep out along the line of a nerve. So it isn't just a silly coincidence. There's actually a Greek word at the root of both of those things. So the ones I start with are, what I have a handful of in this picture that I lead off with. I remember this moment well. I was in Cobb's Creek. I rolled a log over, and there were redback salamanders everywhere. So these guys, they come in two different colors. Redbacks are just like the name sounds like. They got a reddish brown stripe down the back. And then about, I don't know, half of them, it can vary depending on the population, have no stripe. And just because everybody likes things that rhyme, we tend to call these leadback salamanders. We see a lot of these this time of year. We're sort of getting it towards the end of their season. We flip these. So quick pause for terminology. In the herping world, we talk about flipping objects, but also you can flip the animals when you find them under the object. We're not actually walking around in the woods, tossing like rocks and logs up in the air to flip them. It just means you pick them up and you look underneath. And so you can go out flipping boards or flipping logs or flipping rocks. And then if you happen to find a salamander under a log or a rock, you said you flip that salamander. So we flip these salamanders a lot in the cooler times of the year. Even in the winter, there have been days when you sort of have in patches on hillsides that are getting some sun, let's say temperatures in the 40s, and you can find these guys under some rocks or logs in the forest. Whereas in the summer, they retreat underground. And so these are moisture-loving critters. They have no lungs. Now I'd say most amphibians most animals require some degree of moisture. Salamanders and amphibians more so than most other terrestrial animals. And then these guys are part of a family of salamanders that entirely lacks lungs. They have they basically exchange carbon dioxide for oxygen through their skin. It's one of the reasons they stay moist and cool. It's possible because they're small and they're kind of stretched out. So if you think of their body shape, they've got a lot of surface area to pick up oxygen relative to their body's volume. Whereas big critters like us, we have to have these lungs that are full of little pockets to increase that surface area to exchange carbon dioxide and oxygen. One little tip I like to give people is when you're picking these guys up, make sure to hold, I know here I'm showing pictures of them in my hands, but don't hold on to them very long. I basically pick them up, take a picture, put them down. If you want to pass them around to other people in a group or have a longer photo session, bring along a jar, pop them in the jar really quick, and then you can take the pictures in a clean jar and then return them to wherever you found them once you're done. And the basic rule for this is you put the object back and then you release the animal that you found under the object. I will make a note here, not just because I saw that our county's game warden is on the call, but I say it in every presentation that you should have a fishing license when you go catching reptiles and amphibians in Pennsylvania. It might sound weird, you're not fishing, but the Fish and Boat Commission is the state entity that regulates how we catch reptiles and amphibians. So even if you're doing catch and release, think of it like fishing, get yourself a fishing license. That fishing license will support the programs that research and actually support endangered and at-risk reptiles and amphibians around Pennsylvania. Another big group of salamanders, we talked a little bit just now about those redbacks. I should say about the redbacks that they're interesting because they skip the aquatic stage completely. So we think of amphibians, indeed their name, amphibians, means they're existing in two different sort of states, in aquatic and terrestrial. And with frogs, we know about that from tadpoles and such. Salamanders, most of them have a similar life phase. It's kind of like a tadpole, but with legs. And the redbacks don't. They hatch right out and start living in the leaf litter in the forest. It enables them to get sort of further up the hillside, let's say, than other salamanders like these guys. So here we've got a couple species. And I will ask by chat, has anybody, I guess, not that many of us go out there and look under rocks in streams, but I'll assume maybe there's not a lot of us doing that. But if you do, you have the chance of finding some of these. Now, the one on the left is something called a long-tailed salamander. They're not super common in Philadelphia. You see them in better quality or streams that are not so polluted as others. And they spend a good amount of their lives apparently back in the cracks and rocks where water comes out sort of springs. If you know what a spring house is, which is it sort of was a kind of a room built back into a spring on a hillside, which used to be a method of refrigeration because water coming out of the ground is usually in the 50s. So even in hot weather, that'll provide some refrigeration. These guys love spring houses, so it's a common way to find them. The salamander on the right is super common in streams around Philadelphia. I found them in streams in West Philly. They are in streams around the Schuylkill Center. It's called a two-line salamander. They don't look super exciting. They're kind of muddy looking. Sometimes you get them a little more yellow, but they are super hardy. When you think of the things that are rough on streams, pollution, big rainstorms that wash a lot of warm water into the streams and mess with the oxygen levels. These guys are some of the hardiest in withstanding that. So as cities get built up, these are the last salamanders standing, whereas those longtails are one of the first ones to disappear. And I got a couple other ones that are streambed salamanders. All of these guys have aquatic life phases. The one on the left here is a dusky salamander, super common, not the sexiest looking animal in the world. I will argue, though, that if I was a better photographer, I might capture some of these sort of sparkly dots along their flanks. The one on the right is called a red salamander. These are a little bit more photogenic. There's a few of these at the Schuylkill Center. It's one of the few places in Philly where you see them. You can find these guys also out of the proper streams and into what you might call a seep. So you might not even think of this as a distinct habitat, but when you're looking at the woods, sometimes you go up from a stream and you see sort of like a wet spot on the side of the hill where you've got some, maybe some skunk cabbage or some other interesting vegetation indicating that it's wet. Even though you don't have any surface water, that's still a spot where you can find a lot of these salamanders. And then when it gets drier, they might retreat into the ground where it stays wet. I'm keeping my notes in separate papers. The last salamander we're going to talk about really quick is, sorry, gotta get it advancing again. There we go. I'll just ask a quick question for the chat. Has anyone seen these guys walking around in the woods? The one on the left, I'll start there. Yes, Kathy says it's an eft. You're absolutely right. Eft is also a great word to remember for crossword puzzles because it's 3 letters and starts with a vowel. On the right, we've got the newt all grown up, how you see them in the water. And so there's at least one pond, Mike can correct me later, but maybe 2 ponds at the Schuylkill Center where you've got some newts that you can stand there and look into the water and see them swimming around and doing their thing. They have like I don't say 3, really a 4-part life cycle where they start off, of course, as eggs. They hatch out as larvae in the water, kind of like tadpoles. They walk around for a year or 2 or so as efts on the land, and then head back to the water as adults. And even as adults, they're mobile. If what they're in dries up, they can take a hike somewhere else and find another body of water. They're a lot of fun because they're poisonous. I say that because poisonous animals don't need to run away quite so fast. So you wouldn't want to eat an eft, but because the poison doesn't really hurt us through our skins, you can pick them up and they don't move too quick. So they're kind of fun. And especially if you're upstate in the mountains, the Poconos, let's say, on a nice wet, like just right during or right after a rain and you're hiking the woods, sometimes these guys are everywhere. It's just so much fun. Let's keep advancing. I'm gonna switch to frogs and toads. We've got 2 really quick. This is how you usually see them. They're like a little blip somewhere off in the distance on the edge of a pond. When you get closer, they jump in the water and get the heck out of there. This is closer up. We got 2 kinds of frogs. I will ask people, really quick, which one is the bullfrog and which one is the green frog? Does anybody know? I'll take votes for which side is which. I don't see green frog on left, says Paul Kelly. He's correct. They look awfully similar, and really they are. They're very close related. Bullfrog on the right, exactly, Carmela. So the bullfrogs are bigger. They tend to like bigger bodies of water, whereas you see the green frogs getting further away from the water. And if there's a frog that's going to find your backyard pond, and even if it's a little, manufactured pond in your backyard, in your garden, it's going to be the green frog, whereas the bullfrog tends to like bigger ponds, slow moving, creeks and that kind of thing. The way you tell them apart is this one subtle feature. So on the green frog, you see it's got this little crease, kind of this like ridge of skin that comes back from the eye on each side. And the bullfrog doesn't. And so it's called it's a dorsolateral fold if you want to be fancy about it. But basically, that right there is your easiest tell between the two. You look at a lot of them and maybe you get a sense of their gestalt. Mike's pointing out that they sure do sound different. A green frog sounds like, as they say, a loose banjo string getting plucked, kind of like a bunk, bunk. Whereas a bullfrog, it's got its name bullfrog for a reason. It sounds like a deep lowing call, kind of like which usually gets written out as jug of rum, so like rum, rum. And so they sound totally different. And that's a key point, is that one of the ways that we study frogs and toads is by listening to them. Much like bird song can tell you about the birds that are around you, frog calls can tell you what frogs are present in the landscape. And it's actually a really important method of surveying to figure out what lives where. And that's a great segue into this little guy, which is called a spring peeper. This is the time of year these guys are around. Well, they're still calling, probably they're starting to wrap up. These are one of the first frogs that makes it out as the winter thaws. And I only know of one population in Philly in the northeast in the Pennypack area. But I guess the John Hayes National Wildlife Refuge too, of course. And these guys are tiny. They're like the size of your thumbnail. They are incredibly loud. I was in a chorus of them a couple weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, and it was at night and you could barely hear anyone around you. And for me, it's like one of the most ecstatic things in the spring is just to be like in the middle of one of these choruses. For me, it's one of those things that declares that winter is over, spring is here. And I'm not much of a winter fan, so that's a really important thing for me. Last up, on the amphibians, we've got a local favorite for the Schuylkill Center. So these are American toads. They have a distinctly frumpy look to them, but that's just more of an anthropomorph. Well, it's just sort of our read of how they look. As Mike pointed out, right now, if you're walking around the reservoir or the road, I guess Port Royal in between, I forget which road, but in any case, if you're doing the toad crossing project, toad crossing, you'll see tons of these hopping around. You'll hear them. They have a beautifully high musical trill. That is another great sound to spring. Like I said about efts, since they're poisonous, it makes them more fun. If you were a fox or even a dog, you would not want to bite into them. You see those sort of beefy, kind of big bumps right behind their eyes and their ears. Those are glands that if you squeezed them, you might get a little bit of poison out of them. Not enough to kill you, but it would taste awful. And they say that when dogs bite these, their mouths froth up a lot, and it's kind of an unpleasant experience. As a result, these guys don't have to run or hop too fast, which makes them a lot of fun to catch. As with any other amphibian, you want to be careful. You don't want to have your kids grabbing really tiny toads and smushing them by accident. You want to make sure your hands are clean so you don't have any chemicals on them that the toads could absorb. And if you're really gonna hold them for a little while, you want to put them in a jar or a container. And I think with the crossing with the volunteers, they really emphasize that with the containers. So these are a lot of fun. You can also find them hopping around in wet weather and under logs all year round. And I wanted to add a quick conservation note, is that a lot of what limits what we have in terms of amphibians in the city is our water quality, except for the redback salamanders, which might be limited by things like the leaf litter quality. So in that case, whether we have too many of, let's say, this is a topic for the Schuylkill Center, too many of the exotic earthworms churning through the leaf litter and degrading it, then you might have not so many redback salamanders. But they don't need water, right? The other amphibians depend on water for part of their life cycle. If the water's polluted, if streams are scoured by storm runoff with big swings in oxygen after a rainstorm because it gets too hot, then you're not going to see these guys around. So just as a note, anything we can do to slow runoff from wherever we are, the city's Green City Clean Waters project, these are all the great kind of things we can do or get behind to try to get more amphibians in our city. So I will move on. I got a chat right there. What we got going on? Our salamanders. So Kathy asked a question about salamander declines. Not in some cases. So there's a lot of reasons frogs are declining, and some of them we don't know why. I like to point out a sad thing, which is that we've got a few species of frogs that used to be really common in the Philly area, let's say 60 years ago, even 100 years ago. And you just don't see them anymore. No one knows why, and no one was studying it close enough to really track exactly what happened when they disappeared. So we've got some things like spadefoot toads, which you see much more of in, let's say, Delaware or South Jersey. You've got some chorus frogs, cricket frogs. These are frogs that, and toads that you see in, again, other parts of the region, but not in Philly or not in the Southeast PA anymore. We're not quite sure why. So there's that kind of general decline that we're not sure about. There are also, big declines internationally, especially in the tropics, of frogs and toads due to a fungus that infects their skin. So that's been a big hit. Salamanders, there is actually a similar pathogen that originated in Asian newts that were popular in the pet trade and has largely wiped out populations of European salamanders. I'm really worried that that might jump the Atlantic. And then we'd be in trouble because we have enormous salamander diversity on our continent. And so we haven't seen declines yet, but it is something to be careful about. And I'll add a little bit of protocol here. If you're going to be out, catching salamanders and stuff, of course you got your fishing license, but also you want to make sure that you're going to keep your feet clean. It sounds weird, but I'll throw my sneakers in the wash and give them a little scrub down in between trips. And sometimes I'll if I'm going somewhere where I think is a more sensitive spot, I might actually spray them down with a little bit of a bleach solution. The reason you do that is because you don't want to be the one who's incidentally tracking some fungal spores from one site to another and wiping out a local population. It sounds heavy, but that is a concern. It also is why, as a general rule, I'm not going to get so much into the pet trade here, but if you catch something, you keep it in a very clean container, that you've bleached at some point, and then, if you're going to let that thing go, like if you're holding it for a little bit or take it home, if it's a legal animal to take home to observe for a few days and then you release it again, where that's legal, what you want to do is then really thoroughly clean and bleach whatever container you had it in, because you don't want to be mixing microbes between the pet trade world and the outside world, or even between different spots in the outside. I'm going to save, Ken, that earthworm question for the end, just because I'm going to get a little too delayed here. But please, let's remind me to talk about that at the end. Let's jump to a whole different type of animal and start talking about reptiles. We have got very few lizards in Philadelphia. We've got very few lizards in the Northeast United States in general. We've got basically 1, 2, 3, 4 so native lizards in Pennsylvania. And only one of those still is around Philadelphia. It's on the left. It's a 5-line skink. You can find them in, of all places, old industrial overgrown areas on the Delaware River. And they might have always been there. They might have also hitchhiked down from the Poconos on shipments of coal or rocks and other materials. who knows? But they're there now. And these are active, sun-loving critters that if you hang out and watch long enough where they are, you'll see them running around, maybe even catching some bugs. And then you can also flip them under boards and other cover. And here I am using my jar technique. This is an animal. These are squirmy little guys. They're slippery. And so you don't want to grab them and smush them. So if you're anything more than a quick picture, you toss them in a jar and you have a little bit more time to take a closer look at them. The one on the right is interesting in that I've only heard about it recently. It is what we sometimes call a cosmopolitan species. It is a Mediterranean house gecko. And these guys live all around the world. They do great on structures. They run around on walls and they catch bugs around lights. They glue their eggs to I think vertical surfaces in cracks and walls and that kind of thing, which explains how they get around, right? So that all it has to do is glue some eggs, enough eggs to some shipping container, and there they've made it across the ocean. And so you see these house geckos in lots of places around the world, including in South Philly, and I've heard in Port Richmond. I haven't actually seen one myself, but I did spend an afternoon walking around South Philly talking to people on their stoops, sort of a stranger saying, have you seen this lizard? But some people had. So they're around. And we'll talk more about how to report interesting reptiles and amphibians that you find later. But this is a good one to take pictures of if you happen to see one. There's no, I think, worry that it's dangerous or going to hurt native species. It sort of has its niche that is very limited to human structures and human habitations. So it's not like they're going to escape into the woods and displace something else. It's just kind of an interesting thing to see them spread around the world, including Philadelphia. And we've got one other species I didn't include here that hasn't made it to Philly yet, which is an Italian wall lizard, which escaped, a species that has escaped from pet shipments. And one relatively recent shipment a few decades ago has been spreading out from Long Island and has now reached the South Jersey, Philly suburbs, as well as Bucks County. So maybe if we do this again in a couple of years, I'll talk about Italian wall lizards some more. Now, all of these animals are my favorites, but I love brown snakes. So these guys, I guess what I'll ask is if you can use the show of hand, like the hand function, show of hand function. Have you seen this snake in your garden or your yard? I'm kind of curious. I see some heads shaking. I see a thumbs up. All right. That'll work. I see a foreshore from Carmela. I got Paul Kelly saying yes. So yeah, these guys are super common in Philadelphia. If you think about what it takes to live in a city, it helps if you don't have to cross roads much, because roads are animal death traps in cities, as well as barriers for other reasons for them moving around. It helps to be small because then you don't need as much land. And so you could get by in the middle of an urban block or along a railroad track. These guys eat stuff like worms and slugs. They don't get very big, about as big as a pencil. And I hear all the time the people tell me that, oh, I found a baby garter snake in my garden. Sometimes they might actually have seen a baby garter snake, but most of the time we're talking about these guys. They are actually related to garter snakes. That's part of the reason they look similar, but they are their own special little thing. And the one on the left is, to my mind, the most beautiful brown snake I've ever found in my life. And I found it in a cemetery, old cemetery in Southwest Philly. But yeah, you can find these guys under stuff in a garden, in a vacant lot, in along railroad tracks, like I said. So they are just a super fun animal, super common around Philadelphia. I'll add a quick note here that a lot of these animals we're talking about, including brown snakes, are super vulnerable to getting eaten by cats. And I'm not going to get too deep into this topic, but I'll say, if you're looking for one concrete thing you can do to help reptiles and amphibians in Philadelphia, as well as lots of other critters, don't let your cat outside without close supervision, let's say maybe even on a leash, because otherwise snakes like this die. And I am a big fan of these snakes. So let's keep going. All right, we got actual garter snakes. Garter snakes are named, sometimes it's easy to call them garden snakes because nobody uses Oh, Jenny and Paul asked really quickly, what are these snakes called? Brown snakes. Yes, brown snakes. Sometimes you'll hear them called Decay's snakes because they're named after someone whose name was spelled Decay, D-E-K-A-Y. But brown snake works pretty well too. Yeah, that's what they're called. Garter snakes, G-A-R-T-E-R. These guys are named after an article of clothing no one wears anymore that used to hold up your socks. And it used to have, often they were striped with a light and dark sort of lengthwise stripes. And so are garter snakes a lot of the times. These guys are great generalists. They can live, they like to be near water, but they also can get further away from water. They'll eat about anything they can manage to swallow. I like to point out that they are actually venomous. And this is one of these fun, nerdy distinctions I'll dive into really quickly as I show a picture of one of them chewing on my hand, which is that a lot of snakes use, I'll put it this way, use toxins in their saliva to help subdue the animals they eat, right? So a garter snake actually has some relatively large teeth in the back of its upper jaw, and its saliva might be toxic to, let's say, a toad or a minnow, so that maybe the toad or the minnow feels a little woozy once the garter snake chews on it for a few seconds. And that might be the advantage the garter snake needs to like get it, all the way down in its mouth. To humans, though, it is utterly harmless, right? It might, sometimes you'll notice a bite from a garter snake, get these little pinpricks of blood that might bleed a little longer than you think it should. And if you really let one chew on you for a few minutes, if you're, open to that kind of an experience, you might have some swelling where it chewed on you, but not a lot. But it's interesting to think about how venom evolved, and we think of it as with snakes like timber rattlesnakes or something with these hypodermic needle fangs and really advanced toxic, saliva, which is what we call venom. But you also see it in less extreme forms in our very common animals like garter snakes. You also see it in probably little guys like this. This is a ringneck snake. You don't see these quite so often in Philly. They're actually predators primarily of salamanders. And so you might see them in bigger wooded sections of the city. They're a delight though, beautiful animals. Again, totally harmless. Other related ringnecks, once you get into the Southwest, are slightly bigger and eat snakes, eat yet smaller snakes, but ours are a little on the smaller side and just seem to just eat salamanders and maybe some other, maybe worms and stuff, but mostly salamanders. And you can even see on the one in my hand on the left, you can see its head, how it's got this relatively flat looking head. These guys like to stay under stuff. And a nice flat head like that helps you get under rocks and whatnot. This is one of my favorites. The Schuylkill Center, everybody there tells me they see them all the time, quote unquote. I haven't yet, but I want to. This is an eastern milk snake. Anybody know how they got the name milk snake? All right, I'll give it a few more seconds, and then I will tell you. Milk cows, Doug, you got it. And Kate mentioned it also, that these guys are common in barns, and they're common in barns because they like to eat mice. But then people would find them a lot in barns, and then they assume that they were in there maybe to steal milk from the cows. This in spite of the fact that snakes are incapable of doing any of sucking. Their mouths just aren't built like that. But still, that stuck. It's a great name, even though it doesn't make any actual sense. But they're one of our bigger constrictors in the city. Well, we only have 2 constrictors in the city. So these are snakes that I just talked all about venom. These guys instead wrap around their prey and squeeze them until they're dead. And so, that happens by cutting off the lungs can't expand anymore. They can't breathe. Also, it cuts off sort of blood circulation. You're sort of squeezing bigger arteries in there. And in some bigger constrictors are actually snapping necks. But these guys are constrictors. When they're babies, like the one in my hand on the right, they're mostly eating smaller snakes. And then as they get older, they shift to eating warm-blooded prey, especially mice, and their MO is mostly to crawl around and try to find a vole or mouse nest and then clean it out. I've got a couple bigger snakes The one on the left is a northern water snake. Actually, you see these around pretty often. It might be, if I have to phrase this way, it might be our most common bigger snake. They can get up to be about a little over 3 feet long, a bit hefty. They eat, by the name you might guess, they live around water, eating things like fish and frogs. These guys will make you think twice about picking them up. They bite quite readily. Big teeth for a snake, not dangerously venomous again. Kate asked a quick question about other species of king snakes. I'll answer this really quickly. Yes, you see this in a lot of king snakes, that they start on cold-blooded prey animals, reptiles, and then transition, have as the scientists would say, an ontogenic transition or shift in what they eat. As they get bigger, they shift prey. So people who are into keeping king snakes often find that the babies are stubborn about eating things like lizards, and you can only get them to eat mice once they get bigger. In any case, water snakes, they eat fish and frogs, stuff like that. They poop all over you, they bite you. Think twice about picking them up unless you're into that kind of thing, like me. And then the one on the right is my favorite snake of all, the black rat snake. These guys are another constrictor. They are semi-arboreal. That means they can climb pretty well. You even see it in the coil just behind the head. You have an edge along the belly of that snake. And that edge they use to sort of grip onto tree bark or anything they can grab onto as they're climbing. These guys get big. Your biggest ones, I think, over 6 feet, maybe even 7 feet. I have caught a 7-footer. It is a magnificent animal. And you see them in the fringes of the city. I've seen one slip away in the right-of-way, the electric power line right away at the Schuylkill Center. So they're around, but they just don't do great around roads. As simple as that. A big long snake that moves kind of slowly, gets run over a lot. I think that's your main thing that keeps them out of the city. 10 years ago, I would have told you, no, we have no rat snakes in the city. But thankfully, we all walk around with cameras and computers in our pockets now. So the pictures have proven me wrong. And after a few years of hunting, I was able to get my hands on a couple myself. Again, I take a picture and let them go. But they're just magnificent animals. And we can all dream of a car-free future where king snakes milk snakes and rat snakes roam our city freely. I'm going to wind up my tour of reptile amphibians with turtles. I believe we do have some snapping turtles at the Schuylkill Center. And I'm going to tackle some of these questions later on. But so there are some snapping turtles there. A friend of mine once said, we're talking about where I might expect to see a snapping turtle or not, because I was surprised someone found a snapping turtle somewhere. And my friend's like, a snapping turtle live in your toilet. And I think that is partially true. They seem to put up with a lot of crappy conditions. And so you'll see them in ponds, you'll see them in really polluted waterways, you'll see them in pristine waterways. And they get big. You hear 50 pounds. I found some really big ones. They are actually incredibly docile in the water. I have stepped on them more than once, and they pretend they're a rock. They pull their head in, they just kind of go, they sort of hunker down and try to avoid you, or try to make you think they're not there. They only really start snapping when you mess with them. And so, people, people can be afraid of anything. But kids will like to ask me, well, have you ever been bitten by a snapping, or should I worry about a snapping turtle when I go swimming in this lake? And no, definitely not. These guys are incredibly chill in the water. And just a lot of, they're fun in the sense that we don't have a whole lot of big, impressive animals that we can see in the city. It's a funny thing I just said, but I think a lot of our mammals get the heck away from you. Something like a snapping turtle, you'll see it trudge through the water, at its pace. Let's say if you're at the John Hines National Wildlife Refuge and the impoundment there, or you'll see them, maybe rise to the surface of one of the ponds at the Schuylkill Center, and you can get close, not super close, but close to them in a way that you don't get to with like a coyote. All right, I got this picture of basking turtles in a pond in Fairmount Park. One of these is a native species, the other two are not. Which gets us to back to this pet topic. We've got the one on the far left, the big one, is a red-bellied turtle, sometimes called a cooter. This is a turtle that is on the edge of its range in PA, so it's protected as in the state. The other two are different kinds of sliders, a red-eared slider and a yellow-bellied slider. Both of them released pets. Never release your pets. Sorry, it seems like such an obvious thing. But most of the time your released pets die. Let's say 9 out of 10 of these turtles, when they get dumped in the water, they die. They don't know where to find food. They don't know where to hibernate. But enough of them get dumped that, let's say that 1 out of 10 makes it. And then enough of those 1 out of 10 make it that they breed. And then you might have them displacing native species. And they start off cute, like people buy them like this. And they think they're going to be cute little pets in that little plastic container that the guy sold you with them. And then they end up being 10 inches long, really stinky and messy, and a pain to deal with. And then people end up having to dump them out in the wild, which you just don't want to do. Here's another released pet. I like to refer to this as the best picture anyone ever took of me ever. And this is an alligator snapping turtle that I caught in the lower Schuylkill. I had been kayaking and and saw what I thought was a regular snapping turtle, reached down to pick it up, take a closer look at it. I came out of the water, realized it was not a regular snapping turtle. This is like a half-grown alligator snapping turtle. This is a species from the southeast United States. Does range up the Mississippi River a bit, but definitely not in the Schuylkill. So this guy was a released pet. You might be thinking, why the heck would somebody keep an alligator snapping turtle as a pet? I asked the same question. It's one of those things that sounds really cool when you're looking at them as a baby. And then once they get bigger, you don't know what the heck you're going to do with them. So turtles as pets is a big challenging topic. I am not a fan of, some people do it. I'm not going to try to be too judgmental. If you get the right setup, it is doable. But when people ask me about what pets their kids should get, let's say, that are reptiles, I never recommend turtles. They're just too hard. They're difficult animals to keep. Consider them advanced. And so, if you are tempted to keep them as pets, do your research, figure out how big this animal is going to get, make sure it's legal. I should always mention that. And prepare for the long haul. These guys can outlive you. And speaking of animals that can outlive you, here are some box turtles. We'll tackle that question in the end, but here we got maybe one of the loveliest animals I don't know. I'm just so tickled by them. That picture that Mike showed at the beginning was a screamer of a box turtle, man. Really great yellow coloration. And they're called box turtles for the obvious reason, as we see on this one that I flipped over on its back right there, that they have hinges on the bottom of their shells that they can use to seal up their shells and not get chewed up by a fox, let's say. A fun fact about turtles is since their ribs are fused to their shells, we breathe, right? When you fill your lungs right now, fill your sides, you breathe and your rib cage expands, you exhale and it contracts, right? Turtles can't do that. And so they get air in and out of their lungs by moving, let's say, their legs around a little bit, maybe their neck a bit. And so once that box turtle is sealed up like that, you have to also remember it's holding its breath. Just makes it a little bit more impressive. These guys are not doing great in Philly. Box turtles, like rat snakes, do not cross roads very well. And they suffer from the mommy can I keep it problem, where someone takes one home every now and then. And because they live a long time and reproduce slowly, once you take a few females out of the population, that can really start the population into a downward slide. They're also unfortunate in that to find each other to mate, they actually have to see each other. So think about this, it's a short animal in the forest undergrowth or underbrush that has to almost literally run into its mate to find it, which means you have to have a decent population density to be able to have them mate enough to replace themselves. So what'll happen is enough of them get plucked out or get run over by cars, and you still got a few old survivors hanging around, and it looks like you still got box turtles, but really they're not reproducing anymore. So Annette, again, one of these ones where don't take it home. If you find one crossing the road, take it in the direction it's going. It will try again. If you put it back, it'll just try to cross again. Also, don't find if you find a box turtle somewhere where you don't think they should be, leave it. It probably lives there. And if you take it away and put it somewhere where you think it should live, it'll turn around and try to get back home. And in the process, probably get run over by a car or starve to death. So, they're great. Observe them where they are, and leave and take some nice pictures, and then do your best to leave them alone, and hope that they'll be there to enjoy the next time you're out. That is the last critter I ran through. And Mike was like, Billy, we talked about the reptiles and I added the amphibians, and so I felt like I was pushing it with packing in the animals there. Someone mentioned in a question already about ways you can report what you find. Pennsylvania's got a great initiative called the Pennsylvania Amphibian and Reptile Survey, which has got its own website, and that's the local email address that inbox goes to me. And you can also report finds to PARS on iNaturalist if you're already using that app. There's a project in iNaturalist for PARS. You can join that and then submit your finds that way, so that the data can make it into state databases and can help scientists, whether that's on the conservation side or just people researching these animals, learn more about their diversity and their range and where they live and their abundance and across our Commonwealth. So those are my big tips there, and I think we've got a few more minutes left. And we'll shift to questions. Mike.
Billy, this is so wonderful. Thank you. Actually, I think, can you go back? I think you mentioned the 3 turtles who were not native. I think we skipped mentioning the painted turtle.
I didn't cover, I think I omitted the painted turtle. It's a very good point. I'm not sure if I got a painted turtle in this picture. Maybe there.
There you go.
Next to the red belly. That is a common, and you should mention it because the fire pond at the School Kill Center is loaded with them. Painted turtles are
one of our signs of spring, by the way.
Yeah, there you go. They're flat, darker turtles that have beautiful sort of coloration around the rims of their shells. But yeah, great turtles, and if you want to see a whole lot of them, go to the parking lot of the School Kill Center and look at the fire pond.
Or the Manayunk Towpath. There are so many great places to go. Yeah. Tinicum. So put your questions in chat. Some of you are doing it now, and I'll work our way through it.
So I saw.
Yes. Go ahead.
So we mentioned the problem with earthworms. Ken asked that question. This has actually been a topic of research, I think, at the School Kill Center, where let's say if we wind our clock back 500 years or so, or 600 years, we didn't have any. There were no earthworms, if there were, maybe someone will catch me on this. There really weren't many or very common earthworms in our area. You got to remember, we had, 13,000 years ago, basically, it was a glacier parked by New York City. And so our climate was much different. And so earthworms didn't live around here. And in the intervening time, they didn't make it back up from the deeper south where they would have lived. So the earthworms that we find are imports. They probably came over with soil from Europe and Asia, and they eat leaf litter. And they eat leaf litter at a pace that our local plants and animals didn't evolve with. So they can really plow through the leaf litter in a way that's not good for a lot of our, let's say, of our wildflowers, or even things like some of our salamanders. That's that one right there. Then let's skim down a little bit. Cover the king snake question. Black versus red tongue. This is a question of does a red tongue versus black tongue, what would be like the selective advantage of one color or the other? I have no idea. It's an interesting question. I suppose I could look this up in literature, but you got me stumped. I don't know. Ken asked about reporting sightings. We talked about PARS right there. How did the brown snake? Oh, someone asked me in a direct message, how did the brown snake get its scale color? I'm not sure what that question is asking, but I'd say but that color and pattern blends in really well with dead vegetation. Sometimes they'll be actually crawling around the grass and they're really hard to spot. especially in dead grass or just dead vegetation in general, which is where they hang out, is under stuff and in sort of in overgrown areas. And then we have questions about laws that exist to stop pet stores from selling such animals. Sadly, there really aren't great laws about that. It tends to be regulated on the state level. In Pennsylvania, you've got restrictions about native species, but for species from other places, there's not much that aren't listed as endangered in general. There really aren't many restrictions there. And so there are restrictions about selling turtles that are smaller than a certain shell size. That has to do more with the risk of catching salmonella, which is a whole separate conversation. But it's not enforced a whole lot. So it is not hard to find people, let's say at street fairs, selling baby red-eared sliders, even though technically it's illegal. I'm not even sure who you'd call to report that kind of thing. So it's an unfortunately under-regulated thing, if you ask me. As for the question, what do I recommend that people do with animals they no longer want? Ooh, that is a hard one, man. There are rescue organizations for reptiles and amphibians. One that comes to mind is called Forgotten Friends. It's out of Lancaster County. They do a pretty good job. But then you have species like red-eared sliders, where there's so many of them, it is really hard to find someone who wants them. And I know that if you're stuck with one, you're stuck with one, right? But this is a good reason that, like, if you're thinking of getting one, do your research, adopt one from someone else if you can, because then you're not sort of adding to the problem by feeding the demand by buying them, right? If you remove an animal from the wild, they return to where they removed them. I'd say that it may be. In PA, our laws for some species like box turtles, you can't take them home at all. Some other species, let's say like garter snakes, you can collect one for your own personal use, as the law says, but that would mean the kind of thing where, like, if you want to take it home and show the kids, that's an animal for that, and you really could keep it as a pet if you wanted to. The model I like is
I'm sorry, are box turtles protected? Is that?
Yeah, there are species, I forget the term, I think it's of special concern or species of concern in PA. So you're not allowed to touch them. I might be wrong in saying that you could even pick them up. I would say leave them there. I think it's probably harmless to reposition it or pick it up really quick and then put it down for a picture or something like that. But remember that if you're doing that, someone who is involved with law enforcement can't tell the difference between someone picking one up for a quick picture and someone picking one up because they're about to put them in the backpack. So hands off as much as you can with the things like box turtles. But let's say a garter snake, something that's common, not really at any kind of risk. I don't, if you're really careful about it, and other people are going to disagree with me on this, there's big debates about this. I would say I don't see something so wrong with taking it home for a couple weeks, observing it, and then putting it back. Yeah, you put it exactly where you found it. Like I said, you were extra careful about disinfecting anything that snake comes in contact with. But like I said, for me, that kind of brief encounter, I don't worry about that too much. I would say if you're really into the pet world, start with stuff that gets bred in captivity. That way you're and common stuff. We talked about king snakes, corn snakes, things like that. Leopard geckos. I could go on a different topic, a different discussion, but
Billy, if I could jump in for a second, it's 8 o'clock now. We're going to go for like 5 more minutes or so and just tackle a few more questions. So hoping that you'll stay on for a few more minutes and maybe sneak one more question into chat. Billy, if you stop screen sharing, then we can see you better. That would be great.
All right. I don't know if that's the best for everybody else, but here I am.
There you are. Yay. Thank you. There's a great question about climate change in the chat, which everybody should read. And the question is about them coming out prematurely. And can I add a second layer to that, which I think for me, the surprise was learning that reptiles often, the sex of the baby is determined by the temperature of the egg in which it grew up. It was evolving.
Yeah.
So that if an egg is too warm, the sex will be different. So there's a concern that global warming will sort of harm the reptiles that way. So climate change and reptiles, jump in.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I'm not sold on that idea. I still wonder if the animals, the species there are some species, a lot of turtles, some lizards, let's say, where the temperature at which they're incubated determines the sex, right? And so I am not convinced that you wouldn't see adaptation in the natural world of the female turtles just picking their spots differently where they would tend to lay their eggs, but maybe that would happen. I don't know. So I think it's more a question of habitat, of whole areas now not being good habitat anymore. So you have, let's say, a species like some of our salamanders. You see this a lot. Or you could get concerned about this a lot with salamanders that have limited ranges in the mountains, and particularly so in the Appalachians. So you have a lot of salamander species where they only live on like 1 or 2 mountains. One of my favorites is something called a Weller's salamander. It's gorgeous little gold brassy looking salamander that lives on like 2 or 3 or 4 mountains around the North Carolina, Virginia border, and in spruce forest high up on these mountains. So as temperatures increase, and it's sort of like you see this in the tropics with sort of cloud forest animals that
they have to move up the mountain.
Exactly. And at some point you can't go up the mountain anymore.
You run out of mountain. Yeah.
So that can be a problem. I think the question about emerging, I think for the most part with turtles and snakes, they emerge based on temperature. So that itself, I don't, maybe it'll be a problem with some species, but the ones I'm familiar with around here, I doubt that. There's enough other things, that are problems, but thankfully maybe not that one.
Can I ask about egg masses of salamanders? How they look like compared to frogs or toads?
So there are, Ken, you're asking about, there's a few species that produce egg masses. And so with salamanders, there's a group called mole salamanders. They live underground for the most part, come out, and then have these mass breeding events, kind of like our American toads do. But we don't have them in Philly. So spotted salamanders, you get, let's say, if you're up in Upper Bucks County, they used to live in the Philly area. I had a great, interesting record from someone telling me about seeing them in a pond near Cobb's Creek when he was a kid. But they're gone from our immediate vicinity. They're both those and a frog called a wood frog will produce egg masses that look a little different. So then let's.
I want to go to Artemis's question. There are 2 turtles of the Japanese house water garden. Have you ever been there and know what type of turtle?
That was a great question. I don't know. It's funny because I go there a decent amount because I love the pavilion and the trees, which is a great feature in Fairmount Park West near there that my family loves to have a picnic in. It's also a fun spot to bird watch because you're like up at canopy level. But I will have to check out that pond and look more closely to see what turtles are in there. I'm going to bet you it's a red-eared slider.
There we go.
Because it's almost always a red-eared slider that someone let go there. Yeah.
Right. And I want to end with Kate's question. How can we get more involved in being a friend to the herpetological world, which we've been talking about a lot in the last hour?
That's a great question. So we've got a few things. I mentioned keeping your cats inside and keeping them on a leash if you're taking them outside, which sounds crazy, but I know a lot of people who keep their cats on leashes outside, gets them some fresh air, and then you can keep an eye on them if they're trying to eat a snake. Otherwise, things that you do to just generally improve habitat in where you can control it, right? So things like planting native plants, reducing pesticide use to the extent that you can. A lot of the things we are talking about eat bugs or are only a few steps up the food chain from things that eat bugs. So things that help your local bugs, native plantings and such, help your reptiles and amphibians. Some things are beyond our control. Again, I always say the biggest thing is roads, man, and big habitat scale, like big level habitat stuff. And we haven't figured that one out yet. Toad crossing programs are a great kind of thing that addresses that. But on the levels that we all can do in our own lives, I'd say, limit pesticide use, plant more stuff that feeds our local bugs, keep the cats inside, and right there, you're doing a whole lot.
Great. Billy, I want to thank you for coming back and sharing all this knowledge. We appreciate it so much. Everybody, Bernard Billy Brown is a writer for Grid Magazine, so check him out on Grid. You can get it online. So do read Billy, necessary reading for me. And then also the Urban Wildlife Podcast with his great birding friend. So check out the Urban Wildlife, Google that, the Urban Wildlife Podcast, and listen to that. And of course, read Grid Magazine. So Billy, thank you. Next week, we're going to do bicycling with butterflies. Come on back. I want to thank Amanda, who's been our Zoom co-pilot tonight. Thank you, Amanda, so much. And everybody, anybody, feel free to unmute yourself and thank Billy for a great night.
Thank you very much. Wonderful, wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Second that.
That was
Thanks a lot.
tremendous.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Bill.
Yay. Thank you, everybody. So hopefully see you next week. Billy, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. I'm gonna sign off.
Always,
Have a
always
great
a
night.
pleasure. I could listen to you for hours. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Bill.
Be careful when you say something like that, Mike. All right.
Yeah. All right. Good night, everybody.